So yes, thank you. Welcome everybody to this event. Thank you for coming. It is my distinct pleasure to be here interviewing Anne Charnock, whose most recent book, Dreams Before the Start of Time, is a fantastic, we can't really call it a novel, at least not a conventional novel. It's a series of interlinking vignettes, is an overused word, but that's probably what they are.
Yeah.
Most of which stand alone quite well, which come together to form a story that crosses the generations. Anne is also the author, of course, of the shortlisted Philip K. Dick shortlisted Calculated Life, also shortlisted for the Kitschies, wasn't it? And Sleeping Embers of an Ordinary Mind, which this is something of a sequel. Well, another story in the same universe rather than a true sequel.
Yeah.
Is that fair enough?
Well, when I started writing Dreams Before the Start of Time, before Sleeping Embers.
Okay.
So I'd written several of the vignettes within Dreams before, and wasn't sure what to do with them. And I thought at one point it might be, I might form it into a novella. And then I wasn't at all sure, and the kind of feedback I was getting from one or two beta readers was they weren't sure. I put those vignettes into a drawer and started writing Sleeping Embers. And some of the research I had done for Dreams about genetic engineering made the way into Sleeping Embers. So they kind of weren't written in the order in which they were published, in a way. So Sleeping Embers is a standalone novel, completely standalone, set in present-day China, Renaissance Florence, and a future London. And the idea behind Sleeping Embers was to look at feminist issues of the present and the past through the lens of what was happening in the future. Having finished that novel, I kind of didn't want to completely let go of those characters, so I was really attached to Tony Monroe. And when I went back to the vignettes that I put in the drawer, I realised that one of them, I could actually make one of those characters Tony Monroe. The timing was right, set in 2032. The character wanted to be was a journalist, and Tony Monroe in Sleeping Embers as a 13-year-old aspired to being a journalist. So I thought, right, this is Tony Monroe growing up, and I'm going to go forward with her. So that's how that came about.
So although you started this first and then went off and did Sleeping Embers, the character of Tony does start in Sleeping Embers and then was woven backwards into the pre-existing bits and pieces of this.
That's right,
I see.
yes.
Okay.
Funnily enough, I was reading about Jennifer Egan's A Visit from the Goon Squad, which has a similar kind of setup, a similar kind of fractured narrative with vignettes. And she said, after I'd finished the manuscript, she'd done exactly the same thing. She'd written chapters but didn't quite know how to put it together, and decided that she was going to graft a character onto one of those earlier stories.
And she went on to win the Pulitzer Prize for that
did,
book,
yes,
so who knows what's in the future for this one. So Dreams Before the Start of Time, these vignettes, what they're primarily concerned with is the topic of family, and especially the topics of pregnancy and parenting. What was it that drew you to those topics for these vignettes in particular?
Two things. One was I went to a Hay Festival in 2012, and I went to a lecture by Arati Prasad, who wrote a non-fiction book called Like a Virgin, How Science is Redesigning the Rules of Sex. And that was really a kind of précis of all the current research in genetic engineering, and she was suggesting what might happen in the future. And it was great because not many scientists are willing to do that. And so I went to her lecture, and at the end of it I went and had a chat with her, said I was writing short stories in this vein, and could we have another conversation? So yeah, we met up. She was teaching at UCL. We met up and had another chat, and I just threw out a few storylines at her, just to see if she kind of said, no, that would be impossible.
That would never happen.
So I spent that summer of 2012 going through, reading her book really closely, line by line. And what I was doing is, one, trying to understand the science, and two, looking for springboards for stories. Just going through and thinking, oh my God, that would make a great story. You know, the idea of, say, what would the reaction be to a woman who's had one child born naturally and one child who's been born in from an artificial womb, an external artificial womb. So I was kind of seeing, what are these, what are the stories that are going to result between people, between sisters, between partners, between generations. And the other I suppose the other springboard was my own experience, because I do have two children, and I have to admit that I had two children purely for the research for this novel. Sorry.
Dedication and forward planning.
Yeah, so my own experience was such that after my first child, I now won't go into the details obviously, but after my first child I came home after a really difficult birth and thinking, just relieved that we got through it, and just thinking, well, this just can't go on. And looking at the kind of science fiction I'd been reading to date, I was thinking, well, why is there nothing nothing that I come across anyway in my science fiction reading that relates to this whole problem of the dangers and traumas of childbirth?
And there is that gap that you seem to have identified and to kind of slot this story in. Why do you think that gap's there? Why are there so few science fiction stories? I mean, because there are some.
There are some. But if you take away, say, the science fiction novels based on other planets, where the parthenogenesis, for example, is in action, that is, a woman being able to have a child using two eggs and not needing a guy. So if you take away those novels that are set on other planets, and then you also take away the novels that are set in some post-apocalyptic future on Earth, that's most of them. That's almost cleared the table. But you have books, for example, obviously Brave New World. There's the hatcheries in Brave New World. So that it has been done. And then Joanna Kavanagh's fairly recent novel, The Birth of Love. In that novel, it's again in three storylines, and in the third storyline, it's set in a world where everybody's giving birth through using artificial wombs in kind of gestation clinics, and it's actually illegal. It's actually illegal to have to carry a baby by normal pregnancy. So that's different again, because that's kind of setting up a world where there's some kind of despotic state. So I kind of just wanted to write a book about kind of normal life and normal people, and assuming that we have fairly similar political setup to today, maybe going from one extreme to another, but basically the same as today, only in the future, and how these innovations are just going to roll forward. I mean, really plausible, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it struck me as that none of these scenarios seemed particularly far-fetched, and that the world, the book is in three parts. The first part is set in 2034, the second part is in 2084 and 85, and the third part is in 2120. And each of those timelines feels familiar. That it feels like a slightly more advanced version of our society, rather than something so distant that it's or so changed by technology or something that it's no longer kind of recognizably us. And I think that sense that these stories are us is kind of what makes it familiar. And I think it's important as well in a book that's so has so much heart, because the topic isn't just the technologies of childbirth, but it's also the issues of parenting. And what I love is that you show how just because the method changes, it doesn't make the actual parenting any easier for the people who have to bring up these children. I was thinking as I was reading it, a good epigraph for the book might be the Philip Larkin quote: "They fuck you up, your mum and dad." You know, it's like it shows, you know, whether your child is born completely organically or what do they call it? By 2120 they're calling it raw birth. They're doing it the traditional way, or whether they're a gene-edited baby from a bottle.
Yes,
you know, they're still born with all the parental pressures, neuroses.
Absolutely. That is what I wanted to achieve, just kind of rolling it forward, because sometimes when I look at photographs of my own town where I live, or old photographs of London or wherever, I think they're remarkably familiar. So I think we can exaggerate how much the surface of things will change. I mean, yes, there'll be some more shiny buildings, and there'll be advances in material science, which will allow different shapes and structures of buildings. The surfaces might change, but the essential fabric will still be there. So I think you can. I like the idea of the future being vaguely familiar. Yeah.
So, returning to the question that childbirth is a fundamental experience of life. It's something that we are all participants in at some point, even if only from one side. Why is it that it has been seemingly left out of the science fiction canon to the extent that it has, do you think?
Well, one possibility is that when in the golden age of science fiction, when science fiction writing was dominated by male writers, in that era, those guys may have had children, but they may not have been in the delivery room. You know, so they were one step removed from it.
Sitting outside smoking a cigar.
Yeah, yes. So I think that does make quite a difference. And
I suppose
it's frustrating because, you know, you read the books of that era and they seem to focus on the new technologies of transport. Yeah. It's all about transport. And
it's all the hard science kind of machines and engineering rather than...
it's like, how do you get from A to B? And it's like space travel, trains, flying aeroplanes, you know, flying cars.
Yeah, jetpack.
Jetpacked, yeah. So I kind of felt that those books weren't really written for me. Yeah. You know, when you read a book and you think, oh no, I'm not the intended audience for this book, and you put it to one side. Well, I did come across that with a lot of the older science fiction.
And you said that's one reason. Do you think there are others? I mean, if moving forward closer to our own time, when there are more women writers, albeit not enough, why do you think that kind of diversity and the male experience of childbirth has changed? The men are more often in the room. Why are we still squeamish about discussing that as a topic?
Well, I don't know. I mean, maybe in commercial science fiction, it's more of a risk. I don't understand it to be honest. I mean, like I say, there have been examples like The Female Man and Joanna Kavanagh's recent novel. I mean, there are examples out there. I don't know, maybe people just find it doesn't move the story along. In a way, you've almost got to make it the centre of the story. I think that's what I'm saying. Rather than it being just another add-on and and by the way, she's had the baby and it's been in an artificial womb, rather than a tackle. Yeah, I think.
So one of the things that I really enjoyed about the story was not just that you had the technologies of the artificial womb and the gene editing and all of these technologies which we do recognise from bits and here and there and from science. Scientific advances anyway, but what the really interesting bit is that you go into the implications of those technologies.
Yes.
So, for example, I really love a line from one of the doctors who works at a artificial womb clinic, Dr. Christoph, and she says that because of the advances in maternal technology, pregnancy is safe as it is, to the extent that it is. So now, actually, there is higher parent mortality with artificial wombs because people go, oh, well, I'm having a baby in 3 more months, so I'm going to go skiing.
I can fit another skiing trip in.
Yeah, and I can take risks because when the baby arrives, I won't be able to do those things. And that really kind of made me smile and think that that's a kind of twist on it that.
I think this is often the issue with when you're considering technology for the future is instead of just saying, oh, here's this technology. For me, the interesting thing, when I'm buried away, not talking to anybody for weeks on end, is like just daydreaming about all those unintended consequences. And so for me, that's where the stories live. For example, if it's becoming more normal to have a baby with an artificial womb, what happens in the workplace? So you've got a professional job, say, and your employer is going to put pressure on you to have this baby remotely rather than carry it. Because look at the hassle, doctor's appointments, antenatal care, postnatal care, how long will the woman be off work? Will she have postnatal blues? And this is the same issues that the women will be thinking as well. How can the business plan and how can the woman plan for the future when there are so many imponderables about carrying a birth normally? You don't know how you're going to come out of it. So I think there could be pressure on women to fit the pregnancies around the workplace. I mean, there's all sorts of possible downsides. I mean, for example, I wouldn't be surprised then if the men's rights movement became huge advocates of artificial wombs because it takes away that special position that motherhood has in society. So then mothers and fathers have equal say. Maybe there'd be maybe men would feel that they had equal rights of access to children when there's a divorce if the mother hasn't carried the pregnancy. So these are the kind of unexpected consequences that I get excited about.
Yeah, and there's another example of a character who went the route of artificial womb, and her sister and her mother are questioning whether she has sufficiently strong maternal feelings for her child because she didn't carry that child.
Yes.
When the technology is at that transition phase and members of the same family kind of had different experiences.
Yeah, because so they're questioning her because she lets the baby cry at night. And she's saying, well, I have to let the baby cry. I've got this kind of a job. I have to be up at 7 in the morning. I have to get a decent night's sleep. My partner's away a lot. The baby has to cry. But they're reading into it
that she's somehow missed something.
She's lost that maternal connection. Yeah. But I think what would be interesting is what I feel is that you could almost have this step change with human evolution in a way when you get this combination of artificial wombs and CRISPR gene editing, when those come together, and then when we're able to create eggs and sperm from stem cells. So then there's the whole thing can be done in the lab. So you can a woman could take a piece of skin, create an egg from the stem cells.
As indeed could a man.
Yes, and a guy can create it. And actually, a guy is doubly lucky because a guy can make an egg from his bone marrow stem cells. So then there's the option then for using an artificial womb, using IVF, doing CRISPR editing to get your germline nice and neat and tidy, and then the option to have solo births. So a guy can create a baby without a woman being involved, and a woman can create a baby without a guy being involved. And then it all comes down to regulation and guidelines about where all this will happen.
And it's a fascinating and ridiculously complicated ethical debate, because once we accept, have CRISPR technology in a position where we feel like we can edit the human genome and know what we're doing, if you accept first of all that is something you're going to allow to happen, then you're going to remove genetic diseases and negative traits that are going to impinge that future human being's life in some way.
Yes.
But then once you've crossed that line, it's the thin edge of the wedge argument, isn't it? Because, is it then ethical to not grant that child every advantage? Why should they not be taller and stronger?
Yes. And then, of course, disability will be viewed differently.
Yes.
I think this is the issue, that with that combination of CRISPR and artificial wombs, the current thinking is artificial wombs could be here in about 40 or 50 years, and it would allow women to get pregnant when beyond the menopause, for example. So the question is, will that become the normal route, that people will make children in a laboratory situation, that will become the standard route? So that's the kind of thing that I'm exploring. I mean, obviously, initially, these breakthroughs are made by the science community to fix specific problems, say for young women, as a result of cancer treatment, have total reproductive failure. They may not have a womb, they've had serious treatment. So these kind of developments are coming in to fix a problem for those specific cases. But then the question is, how long will it take for it to roll out to the general population?
Maybe this would be a good time for you to give a reading. I believe you're going to read from the very beginning of the book.
Well, I've read from this book previously. I've read partway through perhaps a scene that's more obviously science fictional. But I thought this evening I'd just read from the beginning. So this is the first section that's set in 2034. The first chapter is called The Apple Tree. I'll just read a couple of pages, about 4 minutes. The Apple Tree. This year's crop of apples is so poor that Betty Matteson counts the overnight windfalls when she opens her bedroom shutters each morning. Today she looks down on the gravel path and sees a split apple at exactly the point where she expected to see one. She heard the crunch of that singular windfall just after dawn. As a rule, she collects the apples or apple before breakfast. That is, before too much damage is inflicted by stabbing magpies and burrowing wasps. In years gone by, the tree was so burdened that apples thumped down on the lawn throughout the night. Back then, she discarded any split apples, any apples with a bruise, and all the small apples that she convinced herself were too fiddly to peel. When she'd filled her two-handled blue bucket with near-flawless windfalls, she felt she'd met her responsibility to the tree. The rest had to go. She wonders how a perfectly shaped and healthy apple tree could cause her so much stress. Whenever she went away from home, she implored her neighbours to collect the windfalls. or take whatever you can reach on the tree. She felt embarrassed, offering apples from the bough after offering the windfalls. But surely it made sense for everyone to take the windfalls first. As it happened, most of her neighbours had their own apple trees, so Betty invariably returned home to a war zone of fallen apples, cracked and speckled brown with fungal eruptions. She can't erase the memory, the scars and the rotting. These years, most of the apples are small and there's no surplus. 5 red apples hang high in the tree's crown, too high for Betty to reach, even at a stretch from a ladder. She hopes they'll have a soft landing. Nothing is as it should be. Her husband dead, despite being 5 years her junior. That wasn't supposed to happen. She never imagined herself as the one left behind. And her Aidan, her son, so loving, but damn it, Aidan, she says through clenched teeth. She imagines herself placing her arms around the trunk of the apple tree. Her caress morphs into a bear hug. She tears the tree from the ground, roots and all, and she thrashes the canopy against the ground. Still in her pyjamas, Betty turns from the window and pads across to her walk-in wardrobe. Reaching into the far right corner behind her Nana's red fox fur coat, she allows familiar thoughts to surface. Come the apocalypse, she'll be glad she hung on to her Nana's furs. Who on earth will have any qualms about fur when no one has central heating? When survivors are marauding, scavenging for out-of-date tins of baked beans. Betty has carried this conviction for 30 years. From behind the fur coat, she pulls out a long, soft case, drags the zip from top to bottom, and pulls out the air rifle. She takes a tin of pellets from the side pocket. She walks back to the bedroom, throws open the windows, breaks the rifle and loads a pellet. She aims at the topmost red apple and fires. Reloads, aims and fires. Reloads, aims and fires. So really, I suppose what I'm doing there is kind of setting maybe a frame for what's coming in the rest of the book in terms of here's Betty, a middle-aged woman who's encountering this shock of the new that her son has come home previous to this section of the story. He's come home to say his girlfriend's pregnant, and the circumstances are deeply shocking to Betty, and so she just doesn't know how to cope with this new information. So as the book progresses, we see the shock of the new constantly revisited by subsequent members of the family.
And that's actually the only scene we see Betty in before we focus on Aidan and his line, as it were.
That apple tree does exist. It's in my garden, and I do hear windfalls during the night. One. So it is a character.
But that kind of reaction that Betty has to this changed circumstance, which is that Aidan and his partner Millie haven't gone down the traditional route of parenthood. They've gone with donor conception, and she finds that inexplicably alien and strange. Who knows what she would have made of some of the other advances that come much further in the book. But it's that impact on people's lives. That is the only time we see Betty as a character, but she's referenced in later sections. And it becomes increasingly apparent to the reader how that scene not only upset her, but is actually a source of tragedy for that character, at least.
Yes.
And that's what I think really kind of stood out in this book, was not necessarily the innovation and technology,
No.
although a lot of that is kind of thought out in a very new and interesting way, but it is that kind of human follow-through. Again, I was particularly struck in the 2120 scenes, the scenes the furthest forward, where artificial wombs are now so accepted that a pregnant woman on the tube gets funny looks because it's stigmatized, because they assume that she's fallen on hard times. And one woman actually goes up to her and says, if you can't afford to look after that child, then you shouldn't be having it.
Yes.
And it's, it's horrifying. But those are the kind of implications that I don't think I'd really ever thought about until.
Well, I think this is the issue
book.
when science fiction is right about science and technology. It's often in a kind of celebratory way. And I don't take a view whether these innovations will be good or bad. I'm certainly not celebrating them. I'm just saying this is how I can imagine people living with technology. And it's really for the reader to take a view. So I'm not celebrating, but neither am I kind of critical.
Yeah, and it's true because we follow various family groups throughout the book, and different family groups and different partners and sets of relationships deal with these situations in different ways, and depending on their own personal circumstances and whatnot. But then these aren't the only technological advances and scientific things you've got in the book. It isn't, obviously they are the central theme, but you enrich the world with a lot of other kind of colours and advances. Again, not so many that it starts to feel strange. No one's popping in a hover car to the moon by the last book or anything like that.
No, I'm not that kind of a writer.
Yeah.
So at the moment, are you disappointed? At the moment I'm reading Annalee Newitt's book Autonomous.
Yeah.
And that is completely different to the kind of writing I do, but is another strategy, which is that it is so full of technology. Every paragraph, every other sentence has got a technological, whiz bang. It's pretty amazing, but that's just not the kind of writer I am. For me, the science is in the background. It's very much like writing a standard contemporary novel, keeping the science very much in its place, the way we live now. We don't go around in our lives saying, "Oh, look at this smartphone that's got X." We don't talk about our technology.
Yeah, we take it for granted.
We just use it, and I assume that's how it'll continue. It'll just be there.
Well, especially because you do these jumps, so we can assume that each of the new technologies is established by the time we meet everybody.
Yes.
So no one's going, oh, look at my AI personal assistant. Everyone's just like, oh, Penny, remember to remind me to get milk on the way home.
I do think biology lessons will be a lot more complicated in the future.
It's going to have to take up more of the syllabus. AI is one of the technologies that you introduce here, and it's something you've written on before. Again, it's a technology that you approach in this kind of balanced way that you do the reproductive technologies. There are going to be problems with AI, but there are also going to be immense benefits. And with such a very human-focused story here, I really enjoyed the little moments where you can see how the AI and the use of AI can provide aid to people, but also comfort.
Yes. I think with AI, I have written more about AI in A Calculated Life, and then in the linked novella, The Enclave. And again, I enjoy that. It's all about trying to look different ways of defining what it is to be human. What can you change, with technology, with implants? Will you still be human? When you change yourself genetically, what is it to be human? So it's all kind of feeding into the same thing, really.
Yeah, because there's one set of characters who preserve themselves as digital memories, but the wife, the mother, died before that technology had come about, it's not that they live forever. They're not uploaded into the machine. At least that's not how it came across.
No.
They're sort of an AI mimicking the behaviour
Yes,
as a sort of interactive.
it's almost like harvesting all the digital records for a person and creating a holograph or so the more you're on Facebook now and on social media, the more your future holographic self will be. So the people who reject Facebook, you're going to have a pretty dull second life as a digital entity.
Sometimes
So
I wonder
get
if
on
that's worth
Facebook
it.
now and build those memories.
This talk sponsored by Facebook. It's not. Thematically, so we talked about how it's not really a sequel to Sleeping Embers, but there are. So Tony is a link, but there are also other thematic links. Both with this book and Sleeping Embers, they are books that I thought would have benefited from being illustrated, for example, because they're both very influenced by art. Where's your interest in art spring from?
Oh well, after my career in journalism, I'd always done photography alongside the actual journalism, and I decided I wanted to go more down the visual route. So I went back to university and studied fine art, did a master's. So I'd done a lot of art history, done the usual dissertations, and then basically had an art practice for about 10, 15 years, 10 years, I guess. So yes, there's a lot of art in there.
Yeah. Also the importance of China, again, through Tony, kind of comes through.
Well, what happened was, with China, because I knew in Sleeping Embers I wanted to have a character who was an art historian. And I didn't know if she'd be in the present day storyline or the future storyline. But I knew there'd be an art historian. And I wanted her to have a character kind of in the same book. I wasn't sure she'd be related or a partner to her character, but someone who had a completely opposite job to act as a kind of foil. So I thought it would be really great if I could have someone who works mainly in China, maybe has a long distance commute to China. So, I was thinking very much, I really would like to do that. Then, by coincidence, my son Robert, over there, his girlfriend at the time was working in China, teaching at the University of Suzhou. And a contract was coming to an end in several months' time. And she said, well, before my contract finishes, would you like to visit? Yay! That was like bingo.
Yeah. Count it as a research trip and write it off as a business expense.
Oh yes, there is that. So I went to China for about a month. Spent a lot of time in Suzhou, in Shanghai and Xi'an, various places. And I didn't go like with notebooks saying, this is going to go in, this is going to go in. I didn't. I did a photographic record, just took a rough diary of what we'd done each day, but certainly I wasn't taking copious notes. I just went there and experienced it, absorbed it, and then the day after I got back, I started writing Sleeping Embers, because I just had it then. Yeah,
Wow.
It was perfect. It was just perfect.
And it's in both of the books, you do kind of capture. There's a sense of China as the place. You can tell that you've spent a reasonable amount of time there, not just a week holiday or something, doing all the tourist spots.
Yeah.
They feel like real places. It struck me as I was reading it as well that just as we need to see more science fiction about issues like pregnancy and topics of the everyday like that, we're also going to see more and more science fiction that deals with China. Not just that comes out of China and that's increasing in its quantity, and there's some amazing stuff like that the Ken Liu anthology that came out recently. But there is this kind of acknowledgement of this other world, this other cultural entity on the other side of the globe that is going to be of increasing importance
Absolutely.
to our lives.
And one thing I want to do, I had hoped to do it this year, but this year got a bit too complicated for me. What I would like to do is actually experience that physical distance from here to China. So I have been researching the train lines, but I don't want to go through Russia. I would love to go through Kazakhstan into northern China and then down to Beijing. So I am researching that because I would quite like, I don't even know if it would end up in a book, but I do want to experience that physical distance of travelling from the edge of Europe, which is kind of what we are in many ways, the edge of Europe through to China.
Yeah, it is something I've always been fascinated by, that the sense that you can board a train just over there and get all the way to Beijing with only a couple of changes if you get there on the right trains. It's bonkers. And then that is actually how two of your characters, Tony and Atticus, towards the end make a journey to China, although it only takes them a couple of hours.
Well, of course, because then we'll have these
ultra high speed.
The ultra high speed systems, which inevitably China will be one of the first to introduce.
Yeah, it's fascinating. There's a couple of other things that I want to talk to you about before I throw it open to our audience and see if there are any questions out there. One of them is the Lovelace conversations that I know you've been doing with the Clark Award.
Yes.
Why don't you tell us about those and how you got involved?
It was Tom Hunter's idea. I think he felt that he would like the Clark Award to have more of an online presence through the year instead of it just being the shortlist and then the awards ceremony. And there had been that issue in 2013 when there was the all-male shortlist.
The Chris Beckett stock.
Yes, which was an excellent book. Loved that book. Tom Hunter, who's the director of the Arthur C. Clarke Award, was in contact with Sue Charman-Anderson of the Ada Lovelace Day, which celebrates women working in STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering and maths. So the two of them came together and thought, wouldn't it be nice to have something going on between Ada Lovelace and Clarke Award? Now, Tom had seen that on my own blog over the years I'd done not so much interviews with other writers. We'd had a conversation where I'd send them an email with a question, then they'd email me back with a question. So it really was a conversation rather than
a two-way interview.
It really was. And he said, would you like to do some of those? So I said yes. So because for me that kind of thing, it's like fun. It doesn't feel like it doesn't feel like work, because I'm able to ask authors who I really admire questions that perhaps non-writers wouldn't ask. So far I've done interviews with Sue Charman-Anderson, who's a scientist and writer, fiction writer, with Nina Allen and Emma Swift over there as well. And and then of course with Irena Sunakoji, who I met through Unsung Live. She read a short story at that event and I just thought, oh my god, she is the real deal. So I kind of rushed after her and said, would you do a conversation for the Ada Lovelace? And I've done another which will be published soon with Ren Warren.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So they've been great fun, and I think people have quite enjoyed them.
Yeah, and they were fascinating to read, and it was that kind of slightly less formal kind of conversational tone of them that makes them in some ways in a lot of ways more insightful than your kind of standard boilerplate interviews that are on too many blogs and websites.
Yes.
I think. And do you plan on continuing on with them, like beyond the next forthcoming one?
Yes, I've got another one coming up. Yes.
Yeah.
I haven't been told to stop anyway.
Well, you just keep going until Tom says
Maybe
stop.
I'll get an email from Tom saying desist.
I doubt that. I think you're okay. Yeah. So, I mean, obviously you enjoy doing these pieces, and you know you're talking to a lot of writers who you're already friends with, or meet people that you've had the chance to meet previously.
It's more that I've come across their work, admired it, and made contact. That's normally how it comes about.
Do you think that programs like the Lovelace interviews and similar sorts of innovations are important for the role and position of women in SF?
Well, I'd like to feel it's serving a useful purpose. I think it's easy for women's voices to get not so much sidelined. It's more of the structural problems that we have within the publishing industry that we have to kind of overcome. So I was saying in a Q&A with Tom only the other week that I often think of Nassim Nicholas Taleb's book, The Black Swan, about how in an online digital world more and more attention is focused on fewer and fewer people, products, issues. And so in a way, once somebody becomes successful, gets a bit of success, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because they're more likely to be reviewed, they're more likely to be read, and so you get a huge amount of attention focused on a relatively small number of authors. So I think my feeling is with the Ada Lovelace conversations, it's let's just look at some of the newer writers. Let's look at people who are perhaps not so much overlooked, but aren't the usual kind of big names.
Aren't Margaret Atwood or?
Oh yes, you when you see these lists of the 10 best novels about genetic engineering, and you just know what's going to be on the list, and it's like, oh yes, yeah, thank you.
The other thing I wanted to ask you about was indie publishing. So your books are all published by 47 North. And you came to be published by them in a, I suppose it's fair enough to call it an unconventional route. Yeah.
It was unconventional certainly at the time because I didn't have an agent, and so I decided with a calculated life, partly out of frustration, but partly my sons who were more techie than me were saying, for God's sake, will you just self-publish it? And so it's not just a question of pressing a button, there's a massive amount of work involved. So yes, I did self-publish reluctantly, and I was just incredibly lucky that I got a few nice reviews at the beginning, and then I got contacted by 47 North, which is an imprint of Amazon Publishing. Okay, so it's separate to the self-publishing wing. I got contacted by 47 North saying, would you like to find more readers? And since I had about 200 readers, I said yes. So, I mean, it's very difficult to find readers as a self-published author. That was my experience anyway. So they did it. They were great. They acted as almost like a small publisher because they were pretty new at the time. So I had the acquisitions editor also became my editor, and then they came up with new covers. Then it went through copy edit. They Americanized spellings. They haven't done for the subsequent novels. And yeah, they've really helped me to find readers, in a good way.
So overall, would you say that the experience of working with them is something that's helped you as a writer?
Oh yeah, what 47 North is really good at is actually finding lots of readers, and many of my books are bought as ebooks, and so it's built me a strong base, a strong readership base that I can build on. So I've subsequently published with New Con Press, with my novella and the short story with Unsung.
Yeah, in the 2084 anthology, which is a superb little collection. Brilliant, okay. Well, I've enjoyed our
Yeah,
conversation.
it's been lovely.
Hopefully everyone's enjoyed listening to it. Are there any questions from elsewhere in the room?
I had one. When Dr. Christoph goes on holiday, and you look at all of it's so deftly done. You look at all the possibilities of the decisions she makes. It's almost pure science fiction in just one chapter of all the things. If she'd done that, then this would have happened, and this would have happened, and this would have happened. But she didn't do that, and then this. But instead she did this, and then this would have happened.
Spoilers.
I don't think I have I? I've just given a general
you've not spoiled it.
It's like an unravelled
It's
choose your own adventure
unraveled, and
story.
It's a kind of wonderful. It's also in the future tense, which is lovely. And I wonder. So my question is, I really like that. It's one bit of the book. It's almost like it's like all the possibilities of birth. Of however you create a child, it's going to be one of a million possibilities.
Yes.
And it's almost like it follows that pattern. And I just wondered, is that, as a form, it was so delightful, is that something you would look at in a longer piece going forward?
It was quite a complex chapter to write.
Seems inspired.
I
like
got
you
it.
just went.
No, I think there were certain sections where I got in a real tangle with tenses, as you can imagine, going back and forth, if she'd done this, if she'd done that. And it was quite funny in the copy edit, going backwards and forwards, and with the editor, the copy editor, and then it was like, oh my God, just let's do it this way. This will work. If we say, had she have done that? Oh my God. But no, it's complicated to write. I'm not sure how it would be on a longer form. But with your encouragement, maybe I'll give it a go.
Right, I'll make a note.
Challenge accepted. Yeah. There is that. I mean, that's a superb example from within the book, but throughout the book you do play around with tenses and voices, and there are first-person sections and third-person.
Yes. In each section there's a first-person chapter. I think I'd first-person.
Because there are, if I remember, the first-person chapters are often characters we don't see again, or that are just kind of passing through the story.
Okay, so I only choose it to be first person if it needs to be first person, to kind of have that unreliable narrator,
right,
and allow the reader to enjoy seeing what's wrong with their version of reality.
Yeah.
So that, those are really, really good fun to write, and I enjoyed that so much that when I wrote The Enclave, which was my next project, I decided that would all be first person, so that you have these gaps between the different characters you want. I really loved it.
But you did, so you decided to kind of mix up the styles in this book rather than go for kind of a homogeneous.
Yeah, I think because it was vignettes. I tell you the structure of one book that I did look at. Well, obviously there's the Goon Squad, but also there was Train Spotting. So Train Spotting is built as a series of vignettes, and it's the same group of characters. Different characters having their own chapter. Yeah. And sometimes the scenes overlap.
Yeah, and that book did okay as well, didn't it?
It did.
So maybe there's great things
so
ahead.
I just kind of looked closely at how Irving Welsh did that. Looked at how Jennifer Egan took that approach. I mean, I couldn't kind of just do what they did because I had to make it fit my own story.
Yeah.
But it's what keeps me interested in writing, and an unusual structure is what engages me.
Excellent. It certainly made for an engaging novel. Any other questions?
Speaking of writing, and given that you've done many things, with writing, I'm curious about how you worked as a journalist and then started writing. But were you always writing your own things?
No. No, I only started writing fiction as a result of studying fine art, because it was only when I'd kind of done that creative endeavour that it occurred to me that I could actually write in a creative way. I really didn't think I had that many words kind of in me. How would I ever get to novel length? when I'm only used to writing 1,000-word, 4,000-word maximum. I just didn't think it was something I would ever do, but I can remember thinking one day I would like to give it a go. But it was only after I'd done fine art that I thought, actually, I am a creative person. I can give this a go. And it was in fact my fine art tutor. I was doing a piece of work about the difference between machine intelligence and human intelligence. And that became quite a long body of work. And in the end, my tutor said, why don't you try to say this in a piece of fiction? So that was the beginning, really. And once I started that, went away and wrote 4 pieces of fiction. And I thought, I should be doing this. So that's when I started the writing.
Does your time as a journalist and the writing that you did in that field, do you feel that feeds into your fiction writing, either in your approach or the way that you research or your adherence to deadlines?
It's difficult. Yes, I'm quite good with deadlines, and I don't worry. If I'm not in a mood, then that's irrelevant. But it's difficult to know for sure. It's difficult to self-analyse and work it out for sure.
Well, you can't take that bit out and see what's left.
But I do like dialogue. I'd like to think I have a reasonable ear for dialogue because it's all about conversation in journalism rather than assembling research.
Yeah.
Certainly in my day in journalism, it was all about one-on-one interviews. I do write tight because of journalism, which can be a nuisance at times because, getting to the word length is a challenge for me. And I think, as much as anything, I'm quite good at seeing 2 sides to an argument because I'm used to interviewing one person and getting the other side of the discussion from another. So I'm kind of not an opinionated person. I'm not one of these on Twitter saying, getting bolshy about something. I'm quite good at, I think through the journalism I'm quite good at considering 2 viewpoints. And being easily persuaded by the last person I spoke to. So I wouldn't write a book that was
Which
judgmental.
is why you're now doing that experimental novel.
Yes, of course, the next challenge.
Well, I think that might be... There's one more question. I think that's probably all we have time for.
I was always very proud that you put Captain of Life on the book cover.
Yes.
2015, but quite a few people reading it and at the time it went down very well. But I want to ask the question about spoiling the ending of it, because the ending is a bit particular. But the ending involves a train station. I think it's not saying too much. There's a lot of speculation about what happened right after the end of the book. So the ending comes quite unexpectedly. Did you ever have an idea of what happened after the train station?
It's funny, really. It's interesting because I think sometimes people can think a writer has written the full story and has only presented part of it to you. But that is the story. In my mind, I might think this, that, or the other might have happened. But if it isn't on the page, the story doesn't exist. So the only thing I have done since is to write the novella with New Compress, which is set in the enclaves. So whereas the original novel focuses on the metropolitan elite and their advantages, the novella focuses on the have-nots living out in the enclaves. Picks up on threads in the first novel. So, it's the kind of the world lives on. But you've got, that's the one.
We speculated quite a bit on it, but fair enough. I have asked you before.
If you tell me your speculations, I would say, well, I think that's plausible or not plausible, but the story doesn't exist. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much. So, the book that we've been mainly talking about was Dreams Before the End of Time, Start of Time, sorry. Dreams Before the Start of Time.
I didn't even notice.
And it really is, it was a completely enjoyable and wonderful read. I loved it very much. And the author was Charnock. Thank you very much.
Thank you.